Weird tales told by a Dubliner.
Be Turlock on me. Story number 2. Treibh of Shadows. My father emigrated to Canada in 1948, and he settled in the west of the country, in the city of Victoria. He bought a house in the new suburbs that were being built around the city. I remember the suburb where I grew up. It was on the edge of the bush, or uncleared land, and my father said that when he and my mother came here, theirs was one of the first houses built. There was much more bush at that time than there was even when I was a boy, but I was still able to look out into the lonely woods from the back of our house. I remember how dark they seemed. Usually, my father went out early to work, but when it was Saturday, he would lie in bed in the mornings. When he did that, my mother still got up early and went to the kitchen to make breakfast. My father stayed in bed, and sometimes he would read the newspaper or a book, and my mother would bring him a cup of tea. He lay in bed in his striped pajamas. I remember well the look of them. Often I would go in there myself, and since he was taking it easy, he would welcome me to sit on the bed and talk with him. He used to tell me stories. He told me many incredible stories about adventures in his youth, supposedly. When my mother would say, "Don't be putting such nonsense in his head," my father would laugh and look half embarrassed. "Sure, he knows I'm only making up stories." I really wasn't too sure. I was young and naive, and it was hard for me to distinguish between truth and fantasy. One topic he talked about was the wild Indians in the bush. There were Indian tribes living in this whole area before the white man came, before the pioneers settled. And even when the land was divided up into farms, and when new suburbs were built, the Indians didn't disappear altogether. They no longer had the best of hunting and fishing, of course, and as a result, they had a hard life now. The tribes dwindled one after another, but they still lived out in the bush, very quietly, like wild animals. They used their woodland lore to live in what was left of the bush, unbeknownst to the white man. They lived by that knowledge of theirs. They hunted and fished for as long as they could, and when things were scarce, they'd steal food from the white man when an opportunity presented itself. There was plenty of petty theft going on then. Though I often heard stories about there being wild Indians out in the bush, the first time I set eyes on them myself, I was very surprised. In the shed at the bottom of the garden, I had big sacks of potatoes stored for the winter. I never had a lock on the door. One evening, I heard something going on down in the shed. I went out to see what it was. I took me loaded shotgun and walked quietly down to the shed. I saw the door was open. There was people in there all right. It was a group of Indians, a couple of men and a young woman too. I raised the shotgun and aimed it at them, 'cause they were just about to make off with a sack of potatoes. The Indians looked at me, but they didn't say a word. But in the end, the young woman spoke to me imploringly. "De bébé," she said. "De bébé." At first I couldn't understand at all what she was saying. She was scarcely able to bring the words out herself. But at last I realised that they were French words. She meant that she had 2 babies in the bush, and that she was trying to get food to feed them. At this point I felt sorry for the Indians. I lowered the shotgun and made a sign to them to take the sack of potatoes and be off with them. They did that without another word and disappeared back into the bush. I didn't see any Indians there again for a long time. But one day when I went down to the shed to get something, what did I find but a few raccoon skins on top of the potato sacks in the corner? Well, after that, especially in the winter, I'd leave out potatoes and other things I thought might be useful to the Indians, and Indians helped themselves to them. Sometimes, when I was out at the back of the house, I'd see the Indians on the edge of the woods, and they'd smile at me. They let themselves be seen, because they were beginning to trust me. One night before Christmas it happened. I remember it well because it had snowed. There was snow on the roads and fields and gardens, and now there was a full moon in the sky. I'd been outside, and suddenly, in the moonlight, I saw a group of Indians emerging from the bush. They were on the lawn at the back of the house. They motioned me to approach, and when I went towards them, they melted into the trees, motioning again for me to follow them. So I followed them into the woods. There was a path of sorts, and they always kept a bit ahead of me on it. At last, after about half an hour's walk, we emerged in a clearing in the forest, and wasn't I surprised to see a big crowd of Indians sitting comfortably in a circle around a big blazing bonfire. Without further ado, the Indians who'd brought me sat down among the crowd. I understood that I was invited to sit down there myself and take my ease for a while. So I went up to an empty space by the fire, which seemed intended for me, and I sat down there. The Indians all sat together in silence, looking at the grand fire burning before them. Then, a man who looked like a chief or a medicine man produced a large pipe and filled it with tobacco. He lit it and began to smoke. This tobacco had a wonderful smell, and he took another pinch of it and threw it on the fire in front of him. Then he reached the pipe over to me, and I realised that I was supposed to smoke it myself for a while. I did, just like I might smoke my own pipe at home by the fireside, and I must say I never smoked a better pipe of tobacco. It was really grand. Then the medicine man gave me to understand that I should pass the pipe on to the next Indian beside me, and so I did. The next Indian smoked the pipe for a while, and then he passed it along to the people sitting beside him. That way, the pipe went all around the campfire. In the meantime, some food was being prepared on the fire. It was dished out to the company when it was ready, and I got me share. At this point, a murmur of conversation arose all around me. And Indians were heard to speak in their own strange language. Of course, I didn't understand a word. I got the impression, though, that every so often stories were being told, and sometimes one of the Indians would break into a song, and the crowd listened. It was clear that a night's entertainment was going on. I sat there for a while, enjoying the crack as best I could, but it occurred to me that your mammy would be worried about me long absence. Accordingly, I got up and made signs to the medicine man that it was time for me to be going. The medicine man indicated to a young Indian lad that he should go with me and show me the way back, which he did. The two of us walked through the forest without exchanging a word. All that was to be heard was the calling of the cat owls and the howling of wolves in the distance. At last I saw the lights of houses. I emerged from the bush at a place near our home. As if in a dream, I walked through the snowy streets to our house. It felt strange to be home again. One night in spring, the Indians came back for me. I looked out the bedroom window at night and saw some shadowy figures out on the lawn. They beckoned to me. Your mammy was fast asleep, so I went downstairs and out the back porch. As before, the figures retreated into the woods, making signs to me to follow. So I followed at a short distance. After we'd been walking a while, the trail started to go uphill, I noticed. After half an hour's climb like this, we arrived at what I realised, looking around, was the top of Mount Tolmie, that hill where there's a park now. At a clearing near the top, I saw a lone figure sitting at a campfire. The Indians gestured to me to go there, and they melted back into the woods. I went up to the campfire. The figure sitting there looked up. It was the old medicine man. I sat down beside him. Neither of us said a word. But we were not alone, because I could see shadowy figures among the trees around us, and occasionally there was a song or the beating of a drum. Then all lapsed into silence again. After a while, the medicine man took out his long pipe. He put tobacco in it, lit it, and threw a pinch more tobacco on the fire in front of him. There was a sweet smell all around as the tobacco burned and the medicine man smoked his pipe. After a few minutes of this, he passed the pipe to me. I took it and smoked, as I had before, enjoying this fine tobacco, whatever it was, the likes of which was unknown to the white man. Finally, I passed it back to the medicine man himself. He finished smoking the pipe. Then he emptied out the dottle on the fire and put the pipe back in its leather bag which he had beside him. We looked at each other in silence across the flickering flames. Far away, I could hear the hooting of owls and the howling of wolves. Soon after that, the medicine man arose and turned to me, beckoning me to follow. I got up, and he walked ahead of me through a clump of trees. In a short time, we were at the summit of the hill, as I realised. We both looked around us at the quiet nighttime view before us. A wind sighed in the treetops. The old medicine man extended his arm as if showing me the vista before us. I could see the twinkling lights of the city and its suburbs stretched out before me. Then, beyond that, and on either side, there was only darkness, pitch black darkness. I knew that the sea of twinkling lights below was the home of the white man, the place where I lived. I found it comforting to look at it at first, for it told of man in his peaceful settlements. Then I looked at the darkness beyond. The whole countryside was dark, in contrast to the sea of lights. Somewhere out there were fields, hills and mountains, and ocean. But I couldn't see them. I looked up and saw the stars in the night sky, countless stars, and they seemed vast and cold to me. Never, when I was young in Ireland, had the stars at night seemed so cold. And looking again from the cold stars in the firmament to the darkness of the earth below, and then on to the twinkling lights of the city, I reflected that the sea of lights below me was cold too, in a way I'd never felt before. It was not me home in Ireland. It was not Dublin. It was a place where strangers lived. But that sea of lights hadn't been there for all that long. Go back 100 years, I thought, and there had been nothing there. It was one with the darkness all around. and the darkness was always threatening to engulf it. But it was because of this sea of lights that the Indians had had to retreat into the darkness like shy animals and live like vagabonds on the edge of the white man's settlements. I looked at the medicine man and I saw that he was crying, weeping silently. Then he looked up at me as if to say, "All this land once was ours, and now we're cast out and replaced." I cried too. Why did I cry with him? Because I thought of myself, out here in the wilds of Canada, a stranger far from home, and not only that, but a stranger among strangers who didn't belong here any more than I did. To be sure, they had followed the pioneers and settled here, and for most of them who had been born here, they knew no other place. But they were still strangers, and their sea of lights didn't belong here in all the darkness of heaven and earth. I had only been here for a wet week, but the Canadians here weren't much better. I mean, they had only been here for a wet week when you compare that to the thousands of years that the Indians had been in this part of the world. So we sat and cried together, the wild Indian driven off his ancestral homelands, and the exile from the old world, who will never truly belong here. The wind was blowing stronger now. As if to say, enough, the medicine man gathered his woven cloak around him and got to his feet. So did I. Without another word, we returned to the campfire, which was still blazing. Unseen hands had been and put more logs to burn on it. The medicine man and myself took our places again. The fire was warm and welcoming, and a great weariness overcame me. The medicine man too seemed to be falling asleep, and I slept myself. I think both of us slept. When I awoke, it was dawn. The medicine man was already awake, and he looked at me. Again he arose, and I got up and followed him to the summit. He extended both arms, like a priest at the altar raises his arms in prayer or blessing. He looked around him, and so did I. Now I could see everything below, the woods and the park, the houses and the buildings of the city below. I could see across green acres of farmland, stretching into the distance, and more woods, and ocean, blue, far away, and then across it to the snow-capped mountains, and I knew the tallest of them was called Mount Baker. Now who Baker was, I didn't know or care, nor did it matter, for no doubt the Indians had had names for it for thousands of years before. I had been thinking of the medicine man and his people as a tribe of shadows, like as if they were ghosts. Now it seemed to me that they were the real people, and all the neighbours who lived around me were ghosts. Ghosts from the old world, exiled to some kind of purgatory where they didn't belong. Looking at the medicine man beside me, it seemed to me that he was the real man of flesh and blood with his feet on the ground, and I was an airy, insubstantial ghost. Our eyes met, and I saw that the medicine man loved the land, even though it was no longer his or his people's. Without words, he was telling me to love the land too, as far as a stranger in an exile can learn to love a strange land far from his home. The medicine man raised his hand. I saw that he had a fine gold ring on one finger with a jewel in it. The old man took this ring from his hand and gave it to me. I understood that I should accept this gift, since the Indians give gifts to every visitor, no matter how valuable these gifts may be. He took the ring and put it on my finger. I took the medicine man's hand and we looked into each other's eyes. Then I turned and left. The Indians took me down the hill through the woods, and in half an hour I was back at my own door. The neighbours were still asleep, no one stirring, and when I let myself into the house, All was quiet too, your mammy asleep upstairs. I made myself tea in the kitchen and a bit of toast, and then I went off to work. All that day I was almost ready to believe that the whole story had been a dream. But then I looked at me hand, and I had this ring.
At this point in the story, he looked down at his hand, and I saw the gold ring he always wore on his left little finger with the jewel in it. I asked my father, "Did you ever see the Indians after that?"
I didn't, to tell the truth. I still had the feeling that they were watching me from the bush, though. I'd leave odd things out in the garden shed, and after a while they'd be gone, and other things left in their place.
"Do you still have any of those things?" I asked.
No, that was years ago, and I don't have any of them left.
"And what about the Indians now?" I asked. "Are they all gone from there?"
I haven't caught sight of them for many years now, and there hasn't been anything taken from the shed either, and I have heard of no petty thefts anywhere else in the locality. Of course, this suburb has grown a great deal now. So many houses have been built. The bush is getting smaller every year. I suppose that tribe of Indians has died out. But you never know. Maybe there's some of them still out there in the bush.
"Maybe there are," I said, with wide eyes.
Well, if you ever see any of them, let me know, for I'd like to see them again myself.
So sometimes late at night, I would look out at the back of the house, near the shed, and I would look at the trees at the bottom of the backyard, for I wanted to see if there were any Indians. Sometimes I fancied I saw strange shapes moving out there, passing through the moonlight, or a pair of eyes watching me in the darkness. And once I saw a hunched figure looking at me with what seemed to be a mask on its face, or war paint. But then it ran across the lawn in the moonlight, and I saw it was just a raccoon. They come out during the night to steal food from people's garbage cans. I have a little house in the suburbs myself now. Every evening as I come home from work, I walk through the university lands near where I live. There's a trail through the woods there, all that is left of the bush that once was. One evening not long ago, I saw a cat owl sitting on a tree branch, and the full moon already rising. At times like this, I always think I'm going to meet the wild Indians at last. That the medicine man will be standing on the trail before me with his pipe in his mouth, smoking. Or that the young woman will come towards me through the trees in the twilight.
"De bébé,"
she will whisper to me.
"De bébé, monsieur."
You have been listening to Treibh Shadows, Theodora Kroeber, from Weird Tales Told by a Dubliner. If you've enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment. And so, until next time.